Welcome to the reality show, day 75 of the war in Israel. Today's title hopefully is a bit controversial. I don't think it will be that controversial for our audience. It shouldn't be controversial for anybody. This, I think, is pretty clear, but apparently it is not, and we will discuss why the title today is "The Palestinian People Are the Enemy." This is we keep hearing this distinction being made, and it's a big part of the argument that Israel needs to be careful about killing civilians, and this bizarre argument that Biden has made, and I think some in Israel agree with, which is that after Hamas is taken out, the PLO, essentially, the Palestinian Authority, but it's really the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is a terrorist organization, even if it's not formally designated as such, should take over, which is exactly how we got here in the first place. And we will do an episode about the Oslo Accords at some point and elaborate on that. But yeah, let me introduce my co-panelists. So I'm joined by Morgan Carter, John Wass, and Jonathan Daon. The reason I wanted to do this today was because of this story that was it was in Israeli media. It was based on something that NBC did in the US, and that's that one of the hostages who was taken on October 7th in a video that also was one of the more famous ones there because we're talking about Noa Argamani. So she was taken, and there's a video of her being taken and her boyfriend being taken, and she's crying, and so the story is that it looks like she was not taken by Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that also took some hostages, but that they were taken by just a Palestinian mob who once people in Gaza heard that parts of the fence are down, they just came into Israel and took part in whatever they could take part in. I've since read some reports, I don't know how credible they are, that this is the case with other hostages. It's certainly not a surprise to anybody that the Palestinians would take such an opportunity and do that, because again, Hamas didn't come out of nowhere. They are a part of the Palestinian people. They're very much living by Palestinian values. Jonathan, you are closest geographically to the situation because you are in Israel. We'll go to you first.
Thank you, Razi. It's great to be here. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I was just thinking about an interesting parallel. In the Second World War, there were a lot of, as we know, there was a systemized slaughter, mass murder, genocide of the Jewish population and other populations in Europe by the German authorities. But there were also instances of individual instances, even large, of big groups just murdering Jews. We've seen that in Romania, I think, famously, and of course in Poland, although they like to say nothing of that ever happened. There are instances of that, of population just randomly massacring Jews. It's something that happened throughout history. And I don't think I don't think it's surprising to anyone from Israel. It might be surprising for people outside of Israel, but the idea that there are people who will randomly, as a moment of passion, go and murder Jews is not a strange or a foreign idea. It happened throughout history, and unfortunately, it seems to continue to happen despite the foundation of Israel. So just one thing about generally, but people were being taught that philosophy in Gaza and in the West Bank too, by the way, that the Jews are the devil, that they stole their land, that they are occupying them, all of that, and all the bits from the Quran that they bring out to justify that. It's not surprising that something like that happened. These are people who take ideas seriously. That is the consequences of an idea. And people, I suppose, also in the West don't really see ideas as something that really can makes people act. Therefore, it's a bit strange to see something like that. They don't really think they really mean that, but of course they take it very seriously. One other thing about the population in Gaza. Um, I hear a lot in the media. I was listening to Piers Morgan the other day, and I hear that any journalist pretty much says that I support Israel's right to defend itself, but the rest, it doesn't really have the right to defend itself. Essentially, that's what he's saying, and I think that is because they believe that there's just a group of bad people, Hamas, and they took over the poor Palestinian people, and Israel must separate between this group that took over Gaza, between the peaceful, law-abiding Palestinian people, and that idea is disastrous to Israel. It really means that Israel cannot defend itself, and it fails to grasp the essence of the enemy. The enemy is the people, and these people support in an overwhelming majority what happened in October 7th, and that has to be realized. Yeah.
Yeah, I should say the Ayn Rand Center UK does not endorse acts of self-sacrifice, which listening to Piers Morgan without a doubt is. So you're wrong. You're wrong. I promoted you, Jonathan. Yeah, I will express my disagreement with you on that choice. John, I think when I think of how bad the situation is in the West and how the war is viewed, I think it's terrible in the U.S., but the U.S. is less bad than anywhere else. How do you think most Americans would take what we're saying here, which is the enemy is the Palestinian people, and that's how this war should be viewed?
Okay, so there's a lot going on here, obviously, and what people probably perceive as competing principles. So, because it's actually happened to me when I've discussed this with reasonable people that aren't Palestinian supporters or Gazan supporters or Hamas supporters. I think that people in the West, first of all, can't fathom this level of evil, or that a lot of people would agree with it. So there's that one wall that stands before them that they are willing to really examine. But the fact of the matter is you cannot deny that there are, in fact, some innocent people in Gaza, children who are too young to understand, and the people that didn't vote in these polls that support Hamas. So while I don't think that's a reason for Israel not to defend itself, it is a fact that innocent people do exist in Gaza. Just the fact of humans have free will, that has to be the case. So one major thing that prevents Westerners, I think, from fully supporting the idea that most Palestinians are in support of Hamas is the idea that we know that Hamas uses violence to keep its citizens in line. And so a lot of people I talk to think that these polls are under duress of the Hamas militants. So they can't understand that it's not just about the polls, though, like you said, the video and this other group that seems to have captured civilians and stuff like that from Israel. So the polls are one thing. And I also think Westerners are very skeptical of polls right now, in general. They're skeptical of all information. But I also think that Westerners tend to put a lot of weight onto the Western idea of innocent until proven guilty. So like the idea that it's better that 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man be punished or whatever. I think a lot of people are applying that here. And then on top of it, I don't think it matters. Even if 95% of Palestinians could be proven to support Hamas, people would still want the weight put on the innocent, partly for altruism, but partly as a consequence of this idea of innocent until proven guilty. Because even I run into that myself when I'm thinking about this. That innocent takes precedence over guilty, in the sense that we don't have law and order in Western civilization just to punish evildoers. We have law and order to protect the innocent, and that is what it falls under. So I think what they're doing is applying these principles to a war, which doesn't work. And for some reason, I don't know why proportionality doesn't matter in this sense. Numbers are everything to them in the war, but when it comes to the percentage of people that support Hamas, that doesn't matter. All the weight has come down to the innocents, and the guilty should be overlooked until the innocents are protected. But what people fail to see is that if what they believe is true about Hamas taking over Palestine, well, then really these Palestinians that don't vote for Hamas, or that are children that can't, they are hostages of Hamas as well, and they need to be saved too. And actually destroying Hamas is the only way to save them. So it's really a mess, and people can't think about it clear enough to be certain about it, I think.
So Christopher Smith in the chat says something along the lines of what I was going to say. He says children are innocent even if they are violent. Adults, I'd say 99%. I would add a percent to that. Like even if you're not involved in any way, if you're an adult in Gaza, you're at the very least. I mean, you're not actually opposing what they are doing in any meaningful way, and opposing it in a poll doesn't count. Doesn't count. When people die, it doesn't help. When people are slaughtered, it does not help that you voted against that in a public opinion poll. So I'm looking at this poll, and the question asked was, how much do you support the military operation carried out by the Palestinian resistance led by Hamas on October 7th? And the interesting, so they divided to Gaza and the West Bank, and in Gaza it's lower. Of course, there's no why there. If you're in Gaza and you no longer have a home, then maybe you oppose it because of that. It's not that you oppose it because you think being a savage is bad. It's that you liked having a home and you don't like not having one. And another thing that's interesting here is on the question. On that question, the extremely against is 1.1% in Gaza and 3.6% in the West Bank. So people either are 100% behind it, or they're kind of behind it, or it depends. And if Hezbollah was fully in it, and the Houthis were in it, and Iran joined, then that would be that would increase support because it would be successful. Morgan, do you think the extremely against is higher or lower in Scotland than it is in Gaza?
I wouldn't look to Scottish politics for guidance or information about anything, to be honest. As much as I love living here in Scotland, the politics is most certainly the worst thing about it. So putting that aside, just to go back to the initial incident, this was this video which I think everyone must have seen, which you mentioned, Razi, which was of this poor girl on the back of the bike who's saying, "Please don't kill me," and she's reaching out towards her boyfriend, and so on and so forth. And part of why this story has come out is I didn't actually see anything in the article. Maybe it was that which said that I think we know for certain there was this group. It's sort of an inference made on the fact that the video seems to be happening much later in the day from when the attack happened, and so on and so forth. So at least my understanding is that we don't know for certain yet that there was this group who stormed across, but it seems likely given a number of inferences that we can make. As for the Palestinian people, I agree with a fair bit of what John had to say about, I think what you were getting at, John, was kind of like people in the West are, I guess, more uncomfortable about the idea of committing one injustice as to doing, in a sense, 10,000 acts of justice. I think that's very true. I think, and when we see journalists discuss the issue, they clearly are very, very uncomfortable at this. They very much are relying on the idea of Hamas is this almost like foreign insurgency group who has come in and oppressed this group of people who live in Gaza. And so they very much want to say things that Jonathan said, that I support Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas, but not if that means killing individual Gazans. And that's completely blanking out the fact that, as they all know, that Gaza is one of the most population-dense places in the world. How on earth do you wage a war in that area without the potential for killing civilians whilst doing so? So that's that. Then also what we have, I guess, so to what extent does the Palestinian population support Hamas? And this is something that we can never, really know 100% in the sense that we're never going to get fully inside the consciousnesses of all these people. But clearly, I think there is very widespread support. The election which happened, I think, was in 2006. Hamas won 45% of that vote, and then 41% went to Fatah. So Hamas won that election. And then, as you say, with that poll, Razi, everyone else is kind of falling within the brackets of kind of middling support, which on this issue, when there's violence or when there's war going on, is, in a sense, they have to be counted with the full-on support, because they're the ones who are making it possible for the violence to occur. So those are my initial thoughts on it, I suppose, but that doesn't fully answer your question of whether we should look to Scotland, Razi.
Yeah, and the fact that 41% or however many it was voted for Fatah, I mean, that's a terrorist organization that wants to wipe Israel off the map as well. They just do it, not for Allah, but for the nation. I think that's I don't know if that's where From the Nation to the Sea came from in that video of that woman. But anyway, I see that people in the chat are talking about the issue of children and children being violent. Again, like if you have a 9-year-old with a gun shooting at you, you need to defend yourself. That doesn't mean he's not innocent. He is innocent. He's the victim of whoever put the gun in his hands and told him to go kill Jews. At some point, even if that's what you've been told your entire life, you are responsible. But 9-year-old, I think, is before that point. Jonathan.
I want to say something controversial. I think there's something perverse about the fact that there are so many children in Gaza. People are I think it's half of the population is less than 18. Well, what was that? I don't have the numbers, but if you live in such a place led by such a regime, why have so many children? What kind of world are you bringing them into? You are putting them in risk of having their house bombed because you have a terrorist living in the door upstairs. I think there's a part. It's your responsibility to first, before you contemplate starting a family, to make sure that you're in a safe place, right? To me, it doesn't seem that crazy, but of course, I don't think many will agree with that in the West. Also, one thing about the fact that these people are hostile towards Jews. What happens even inside Israel, in some Arab villages? What can happen to a Jew entering accidentally? We've seen, especially in the West Bank, a Jew who enters a Palestinian village. What's his fate going to be like? Well, in the best case scenario, he might get a few stones, but in the worst case, far worse thing can happen. And that is not something that happens when an Arab comes into an Israeli city. Maybe some settlements, I will go through that, maybe some very radical settlements will be hostile, and they might be hostile, but that is a fringe. It's a real fringe, extreme fringe, and the difference is that, and it's also a subject, Razi, that people I've been hearing about, is that there are these radical settlers and in Israel, so it's the same thing. But Israel is a state of law. Israel prosecutes these people. Israel investigates them. They put him in prisons. And that doesn't happen when Palestinians attack Jews, sometimes their own police. This was during your days when they had more instances when the Palestinian police attacked Israelis. So I think there are lots of there's a lot of evidence that shows that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, we brought this up before, but people who have the stomach for it, and it is not easy to watch, should look up the lynch in Ramallah in 2000. Those were soldiers who accidentally took a wrong turn and were arrested by the Palestinian police. These are Fatah police, so these are the supposed Israel's supposed partners for peace, and they were taken into the police station. The information came out that they were there. The Palestinian people of Ramallah came out, took over the police station, lynched the soldiers to death. Yeah, and I remember Israel's response at the time was to call them up, call up the police station, say, we're going to bomb it, evacuate it. So they evacuated it. Israel's retaliation was to bomb an empty building. The U.S. Clinton, this was his last days in office. I think he condemned both sides for that. So yeah. All right, let's we have some super chats. Thank you, Buster Jones, for the super chat. Thank you, Johnny Ruiz. Thank you, Robert Naser. Robert says, John Was speaks rightly. It's intellectually and spiritually more difficult to acknowledge these complexities, but we can do it. To win, we must do it. I don't know if you want to elaborate, but I think, what does that mean in practice? I don't think complexities should be acknowledged by an army going to war. If you mean complexities as in who is innocent and who is not, I think you know, from afar, or when you look at Gaza in this case, yeah, you look at it as the enemy, and you look at the people there as the enemy. Because if you actually start saying it's complex, you know, some people are innocent and we don't want to harm them, then no, that's not how you win. That is how you lose. But John, I don't know if you want to defend my critique of Robert's defense of you. Go ahead.
Well, I was merely stating the reasons why I think Americans think these things. It's like I said, it's mostly based on the goodwill of the Westerners to not be able to see real evil, and so they can't understand how that many people could support such evil, so they just kind of reject it as an impossibility. But I also think stating that there are innocents in Gaza isn't a problem. It's that innocence in Gaza is somewhat irrelevant in a war. And also that all that's going to happen is you're replacing the innocents in Gaza for the innocents in Israel in the future. So that's why, in my opinion, the number of innocents isn't the crucial factor here. Because even if 30, 40, 50% of them are innocent, that wouldn't change the fact that Israel needs to destroy Hamas at whatever cost.
Yeah, and by the way, you're not just sacrificing future Israeli civilians, you're sacrificing soldiers. 133, I think, is the latest number of soldiers who have died in the ground operation in Gaza, not to mention the hundreds of soldiers who were killed on October 7th.
However, I will say, as being a devil's advocate, this wouldn't have been such a hard surgery to remove from Palestine if Israel and the West in general haven't allowed this cancer to metastasize over the last 50 years. So in some wide scope sense, it is partly Israel's fault too that extra innocents have to die. I do think that is true.
Morgan, I want to go to you quickly, and then I'll come back to you because Jonathan has to leave in a few minutes, but there is a question for you, which I don't know if you can answer, but I can't. But if you can, go ahead, and then I'll come back to you after Jonathan. So Frank asks, Morgan, who is this hippie Mick Wallace, this MP who defends Hamas? Do you know who he's talking about?
I don't know. Well, when Jonathan's speaking, why don't I look him up and see if I can figure that out? I've not heard of him before.
All right, Jonathan, any parting words you have for us?
Yes, I think it's important you mentioned that the Israeli soldiers die because of that. I think it's a very important issue, and it's for me, I think it's a real crime. The people in Israel, people in the IDF or wherever who are responsible for that, they are putting out the best of the Israeli youth. They're just sending them to die for the worst of the people who were marching in the street when they carried that poor girl that they murdered and raped. They are sacrificing our soldiers for that, and I think that's like words cannot describe the evil in that, and they should be prosecuted, these people, and should be called out. I think they are really evil, and these are Israeli people, and it's very important that we mention that, I think.
Morgan.
So I've looked this guy up. He's an Irish MEP, so that's why I wouldn't know. But yeah, he looks like a very unkempt guy. Members of the European Parliament typically wear suits and so on and so forth. He's in there wearing jeans and a polo shirt. It looks like he's got very long hair. Yeah, he seems like he's a member of the radical Irish left, which is a rather notable contingent on the Irish political wing. He's gained a reputation for anti-establishment and left-wing populist views. I think for most people that might just tell you enough about him. So, and he's supporting. It seems like he's speaking in the European Parliament chamber in favor of Hamas and criticizing the EU for being too pro-Israel, if you could believe that. So there you go. That's who this guy seems to be.
Yeah, and Ireland generally has been even as Western countries go, Ireland has been particularly despicable about this. Their prime minister. We had a whole episode about it or a segment in a show. But yeah, we talked about them, and yeah, not
Yeah, there was a good article by Mark Regev. Oh, sorry, Jonathan, you have to go.
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm dropping off. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Next one.
Take care.
Yeah, I see, Jonathan. There was a good article by Mark Regev, who again I'm a bit of a fangirl for. In I think it was the Jerusalem Post, talking about the history of Ireland and anti-Semitism, and that it's not very good. And actually, the actions of the Taoiseach, I think how you pronounce it, the Irish Prime Minister, his actions since October 7th regarding Israel have been not very good, in the sense that it perhaps reflects that wider history of anti-Semitism in Ireland.
So there are several messages, posts from comments from Robert Nasser, which I want to read out. So, and there may have been some I missed, so hopefully I'm reading everything. He says, if acknowledging the truth takes away from our military effectiveness, something is very, very wrong with our military leadership. This is war. Civilians will die. Trying to lie to ourselves that there are no innocents among the enemy is a fool's game. No IDF personnel should be placed in riskier situations to avoid civilian casualties. It's irrelevant whether the particular civilians are innocent or guilty. No need to lie to yourself and say they're 100% guilty. This is war. I mean, again, that's the entire point that I was making. I would not, to me, you are not innocent in the sense of how should Israel look at any action it might take in Gaza. Yeah, you are not innocent if you're just going about your daily life and allowing this to happen in your name and have never actually attempted to do anything either to stop it or to leave. So yeah, in the war sense of it, there are no innocents, and again, except children who were victims. There are certainly nobody in Gaza who dies or is injured or loses their home is a victim of Israel, and I think that's something we should be clear about. John.
I agree.
Morgan, did you have something did you want to jump in, or did I actually skip your turn before and
It's
give you a question that was yeah, yeah.
John can go. No, John, after you, please.
All right, John.
I don't buy that 100% are guilty. Sorry. That's rationalism, in my opinion. You don't think there's even one man in Palestine that wants to get the hell out of there, but can't because his psycho family is holding his kids hostages? You're asking him to make a sacrifice too, which is supposed to be immoral. But, some people inevitably have to choose values. So again, I agree with Robert completely that you don't have to see 100% of people as guilty in order to justify the war. Innocent people will die, and it is the fault of Hamas, yes. So that's how I put it. Because I just can't, in all rational thinking, believe that all the people, the adults there, are in this situation you can easily explain and say they're guilty for staying or for not fighting or for not dying for whatever.
So, spoiler alert for people who haven't read Atlas Shrugged, but I need to give this as an example. And I think we've given that as an example before as well. But the train crash scene where Ayn Rand wrote descriptions of brief descriptions of everybody or a few people who were on the train, and none of them were guilty in the sense that they were, or I don't remember every single one, but certainly many of them or most of them were not guilty in the sense that they were a part of what had brought society to that point. They were all guilty in the sense that in terms of how they viewed their own life, they allowed that situation they lived with it contently without challenging it. And that's where the culture got, and that's a price that they paid for. So yeah, I think in a sense, the Palestinians are in that boat or on that train.
So if I could, I'll say my 2 cents, because there's a sense in which I think you guys are disagreeing, but there's also a surface level disagreement, which I think you're not disagreeing on. Because Robert's comment said we don't have to lie to ourselves about whether there are anything. So I don't think what Razi was saying is that we need to lie to ourselves. I think what you said was based on this, in effect, that when you're conducting a military operation, you can't take that into account due to your soldiers' lives, which I think Robert and John, I think, are basically agreeing with. As to then, and so then, I guess the point you're making, Razi, is that you don't have to be the literal one who stormed across the border, whether you're Hamas or maybe one of these people who we think may have taken this girl, to be culpable in some way for this. And I share your uncomfortableness, John, completely. And I think there will be part of the tragedy of this, and part of the reason why Hamas is at fault is because innocent people will get killed. And the easy example are the children. There'll be children who'll be killed because of this, and that's part of what makes this so awful. But I think maybe what we have to get down to is let me phrase it like this: when Western journalists are saying Israel has the complete right to go in and get rid of Hamas, but they don't have the right to kill the Palestinian people because there's a division there, I think the question that we have to ask is, are Hamas's actions in some way radically different from the culture in Gaza, or are they contiguous with it in some way? Are they a logical product of it? And if they are, then clearly a lot of the Palestinian people who are in a sense creating that culture or who embody it are going to be culpable for Hamas's actions, and will be the source of it. Now, we can quibble about, I guess, probably what's going to be quite a small number of people who want to get the hell out of there, as you put it, John, and so on. But I think that the overwhelming majority are going to be basically, as these polls suggest and whatever, in favor of this, because it makes sense given the culture that they have. But now, and then going back to you, Razi, is your point that literally 100% are going to be guilty in the sense that they're, even if they haven't taken action, they're culpable? Or do you agree that there might be just that small percentage, but we can't do anything about that, and that's a real tragedy?
So in the sense of if this was if each of them were going to be individually tried, is there enough evidence to convict them? Of course not. In the sense of, for example, but like I've said, I think what should happen in Gaza is, first of all, many more should be killed and have so far been killed, just because the number of terrorists alone is far greater than the number of people who died according to Hamas. And of course, that number is, I'm sure, much higher than the actual number. And that those who are left, or at least many of them, should be expelled. Now, do I think if you're expelling people, do I think it matters if somebody was never involved in anything? Of course not. I think this is a part of what you have to do in war. Now, I wanted to make a point about the people who broke in once they knew the fence was down. They went into Israel. That's still, that's not the only example of people being on the side of evil that day among the Palestinian people, because you can see the videos when hostages were brought back, when bodies were brought back. You see celebrations, and that's all you see. People going out to the streets and celebrating. So that's the point that needs to be made here, and that's the point that's relevant. It's that this is widespread enough that any opposition to it, which of course we know doesn't really exist, would be irrelevant if it did exist. John.
For sure. John.
Yeah, I think there's two lines of argument here. The one to justify the war, but the one to convince the people that the number of innocents is irrelevant. And so you do have to get into the weeds a little bit if you want to convince these people that we shouldn't be too concerned about how many people are innocent and how many people aren't.
I'll just read some more comments from Robert, and then we'll go to you, Morgan. So Robert says, Razi, respectfully, a whole conversation can be had on your phrase in the war sense. You're onto something there, but that doesn't change the definition of words like innocent. Again, it's not hard to see that some people are innocent and their innocence must not be taken into account. I will agree with the second part of that, at least. And we have done that in every war. Identifying the facts of reality need not undermine our efforts. If you want to argue about whether anyone, a single Arab in Gaza or the West Bank is innocent, what do you make of the Israeli sympathizers who have been punished or even put to death by Hamas and Hezbollah? Israeli sympathizers, I mean, there are Israeli collaborators, which is great. Those are but even Israeli collaborators, by the way, are very often not innocent people. There are people who are they're collaborators because they have information that Israel needs. How do they get that information? Because they're a part of Hamas or whatever organization they're a part of, and the reason they're collaborating is often money and a better life, which they should get if that's part of the deal. But yeah, I think I do think we're making too much of the idea of innocent people on Gaza's side, but I get that might have been prompted by my comments, which I do stand by. Morgan.
And well, the only bit that Robert was saying that I wasn't really sure about, and Daniel said maybe we can bring Robert on if Robert wants to hop on the call, was about changing the definition of who's innocent. I don't know if we said anything about the definition of who's innocent. So I'm not too sure based on what Robert's just said. I mean, so let's broaden the scope a bit just to get this on side. For example, Jonathan brought up earlier the example of the Nazis. Do we know how many people in Nazi Germany resisted or who opposed the Nazis? No, we don't, in the sense that we can't accurately measure it. There's certain groups that you do know existed more than exist in Gaza, it seems. But you can't really measure them. They're quite a small number. You can make an inference based on the polling data that there was from the elections before the Nazis came to power about who would have, wanted to oppose them. But when you're then waging a war on Nazi Germany, and I think basically none of us would disagree with this, the Allied side basically, might want to support resistance to the Nazis where they can, but basically that can't be their priority. If they need to take a military action, which might end up killing some of those people, then they may well have to do that. And it's the same thing here. So, I mean, and in a sense, I've lost the point on which we're disagreeing, but I can sense that it's there. So,
there's another point we disagree on now, which is you said you were talking about the people in Nazi Germany who were opposed, and we know of some of those, and of course, there I'm sure others that we don't know of. Sure. And you said more than in Gaza. I mean, yeah, who do we know of in Gaza? Again, we don't know of anybody in Gaza. There's no movement. There certainly isn't any movement in Gaza that was against this. We see nowadays a few videos, of Palestinians being interviewed by Al Jazeera, and then the person takes away their mic when they say this is all Hamas's fault. But they're upset that Hamas took action that ruined their peaceful lives while they knew it was coming, and the decades before it, Hamas was firing rockets on Israel all the time, and there were nobody rose up against them. Yeah. Anyway.
But how can you possibly objectively know that for certain? Because don't you think Hamas would do everything in its power to keep that quiet? Even the people in the streets you were saying is proof that all civilians support Hamas. But what would happen to any civilian in Palestine that protested 9/11 or whatever? I'm sure they would be shot or killed, and no very possibly no information about that would ever leave. So
that's true, but we know, I think it's much more difficult to get out of North Korea than it is out of Gaza, and we know of people who have done that. Iran, I don't know if Iran is I don't know how to compare, where is it worse to oppose the government, but we know of protests all the time in Iran, and people die because and they protest knowing that there's a chance they'll die, and the protests grow even when Iran kills their own people because they dare oppose their.
None of that proves that every single Palestinian supports Hamas.
I never said every single Palestinian supports Hamas.
You said 100% is guilty, so.
Well, I said no. Actually, what I said was I don't consider anybody who is not a child innocent. In the sense that, again, Robert, we will bring this up again, I'm sure, but I will repeat my phrase, in the war sense, because this is war. Because this is not. You're not saying, okay, let's randomly pluck people off the street, put them to trial as we would anybody in a
sure, normal. But just saying it's war doesn't mean that everyone is guilty. It just doesn't. It's two separate.
Well, let me mediate you two then for a second, because I think what Razi's getting at is that, because Razi brought up the train example before, right? So the people who are, in a sense, tacitly supporting it, even though they might not be doing very much, in their passivity, they're lending support to it. So I think that's part of what he's saying.
Right. No, I understand the tacit part, but even that, I can't agree that we would know of the people that were rebelling against Hamas, or that, they just simply failed and we don't know what their attempt was.
I mean, in a sense, I'm sympathetic to that, but then in a sense, we're kind of speculating a little bit.
Right. Yeah. No, the whole thing is speculating. That's why I'm saying we got to look away from this idea of all innocent or all guilty. It doesn't help the argument.
So I just want to say, and then I'll go to you, Morgan. I want to say I'd also be sympathetic to that, but like you say, we don't know of those people. So give me one person who actually took action to remove. To try to remove Hamas, and then we can talk about that one person. Huh?
The son of the Hamas leader.
Yeah, he's not there.
Well, but But he did what you said no one does. He got out of there, and now he is a true hero.
So,
As a
yeah, I don't think I said nobody gets out of there, and if I did insinuate that, let me correct that part of it. But yeah, again, this is the one place where there's no opposition to the central idea. There's opposition to Hamas, or there are other organizations. There's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I'm sure Fatah has some presence still in Gaza, but there's no opposition to the idea that Israel should be wiped off the map, that killing Jews is a good thing. And again, we don't see that in this poll about October 7th. What we see is mixed opinions, mostly supportive, but some mixed opinions about whether this was the right thing to do, which tells me nothing about whether that it gives me no proof that anybody actually is against it. Morgan.
I've lost my point slightly. Because I kind of agree with parts of both of what you're saying, but so I guess we all agree on the tacit support then. I guess there's another point. Now, maybe this doesn't make you guilty, and I guess we're arguing about innocence and guilt, so maybe this isn't a useful point. But even if there are people who are not doing the tacit support kind of thing, there are people who I guess still, who by virtue of being there, I presume they're having taxation collected by by Hamas as a state, and all this kind of thing, are in a sense lending support to the war effort. And there's that kind of thing. The classic, example is, a conscript drafted from the population. Now, I don't know whether that's happening, but that's the kind of stereotypical example, to the point where they're still, in a certain sense, culpable, even if they don't want to be. And that's part of the tragedy, I guess. But maybe that's another building block that we're missing. But as I said, I've forgotten what I was going to say, so I'll throw it back to you, Radley.
Yeah, I'll also throw it back to you, John. I'll just say, I will go into people like Son of Hamas and say, yeah, the fact that somebody actually does that is such a heroic act. But again, it's if you look at totalitarian regimes around the world where it's much more difficult to do anything or leave, yeah, among the Palestinians, certainly in Gaza, we don't see that. John.
Well, yeah, a vast majority obviously support what's going on, and I don't disagree with that. But I will not cede to the point that everyone there is guilty. You just do not know that. You don't know what people are trying. You don't know how long they've been trying it. And even if they are paying taxes, all you have to do is become one of the poor people, and you're no longer contributing to their tax revenue and everything. I mean, what if these Palestinians are just quietly shrugging, and they're allowing themselves to die actually hurts Hamas more than actively fighting. I'm just saying we don't know, and we can't put the argument on that fact. We need to argue on the fact that, yes, innocents will die. It is terrible and horrible, but Hamas wants it this way. They planned it this way. Actually, Jonathan made a point before about there being more than 50% of the population being children or under 18. I don't remember the exact fact, but there was I was made aware of this a while back, but there's a YouTube site called Speak the Truth, and it's run by two former U.S. military. And they have been talking a lot about the war. And in it, they show two captured Hamas terrorists being questioned by Israelis. And the terrorist describes in detail what they did. So they're talking about a minute and a half in with a Palestinian female broadcaster saying the following: "Why do you, the Palestinians, give birth to so many boys and girls?" And she goes on to say that she heard the most powerful answer: "We give birth to so many children so that we can push them to death, to martyrdom." It is truly stunningly evil. They want more civilians to hide behind. They are their defense, literally. And they think they're giving them salvation by offering them up as sacrifices for Allah. But Westerners will never believe, like, they can't even fathom that kind of thinking. So it's almost impossible to describe to them.
So yeah, I once again am with you on the we don't know part, and in terms of any good people there, and I think what we all are in agreement on is that Israel should act on what we do know, which is who the enemy is, and that it must be defeated at as low a cost as possible for Israel. On another point, yeah, the 50% of people in Gaza are under 18. That's another thing that I hear a lot, and I have to say, any figures that come out of Gaza, I always assume are lies. Whether it's the 50% or under 18, that's the kind of thing that if true, is very good for Hamas's PR, and the whole most densely condensed, most
Population
densely
density.
populated area in the world. Again, I call bullshit on. Of course, the number of dead we know is a lie, because we've seen in individual cases how it's been how it has been proven a lie, and that is the Hamas way. So we have a super chat from Frank. Thank you, Frank. He asks a question that is off topic and I don't know the answer to, but I will read it anyway. What is going on with Christian Israel tourism now? I don't know. I know it's a thing. I don't know what is going on with it now. I know that almost every airline has stopped flying to Israel. So if they are flying, they must be flying El Al. I think there's like one or two, maybe a Russian airline that is still flying. And I know Lufthansa Group is relaunching its flights in January. So if we have any Christian viewers who are interested in going to Israel shortly after Christmas, you'll have options like Lufthansa, Swiss Air, and Austrian Airlines, so you don't have to fly El Al, which I don't like doing, or whatever Russian airline, which I certainly wouldn't do. I don't think that's a great answer to your question, Frank, but that's the best I can do. If either of you know more about that, please let us know.
No, not particularly. I saw that I think the birthright scheme has started back up, which is the scheme. I think it's run by the Israeli government, isn't it, to allow Jews from around the world to travel to Israel. I saw that it started back up, but I'm not that clued in on the Israeli tourism industry, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Frank elaborates and says people visit Galilee, Nazareth, Bethlehem. Yeah, that's true. I mean, Bethlehem is in the West Bank, so I don't know if you try to go there now. Actually, it is interesting because Christmas is the time that many visit, and Nazareth.
Yeah, I did see, just in passing, I didn't look into it, but I did hear that tourism in Israel overall is suffering. But I did see something, I didn't read it, but something about canceling Christmas in Israel or whatever. Like, they're just not getting anyone coming for the regular things that Christians do in Israel around Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem not just because airlines aren't flying to Israel and it's scary to go to a country that's at war. It's also that people, Israelis who lived in the area around Gaza that was attacked, and people who live in the north, which is still under daily attack by Hezbollah, and Israel does very little to do that. They've all left. They've all been evacuated, and they're all in hotels. So tourism is non-existent in Israel at the moment, but the hotels are full in many cases. So
yeah, and war is supposed to be so good for the economy, right?
yes, that Keynes. Who is that?
The neocons say it a lot as well. So there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the popular isolationist shtick.
Yeah, there was some general, I think, didn't he who wrote a whole book about how war was good for the economy, but I can't remember who that is off the top of my head.
Well, it's on atheist sites and conservative sites. you know, it's all for the military industrial complex and money, money, money. You know, they're throwing that argument out there all the time, even in this war.
So I think there's a bunch of messages in the chat that I didn't get a chance to read. I see the last one, which is Frank saying people who run the church in Bethlehem are afraid. They should be afraid. You know, they'll end up discovering or not discovering that they wasted their life on a belief system that actually is completely divorced from reality. Yeah, Morgan.
We did briefly discuss something on the show maybe a week ago, which is maybe where this is coming from. There was a church in Bethlehem, I think, I think maybe you sent me the story, Razzie, which had a baby Jesus in a manger with a bunch of rubble on the top of it. So apparently there's some kind of radical Christian churches around. So I don't know, maybe radical Christians are all making a pilgrimage this year to Bethlehem, who knows? But Razzie, are you reading out free comments? I mean, you know, this harshly goes against our
I know this is very anti-capitalist of me. I guess I've been you know, taken in by the swept by the movement. Yeah, all right. We'll stop that after I read Robert's last comment, which is to be clear, the stand that I believe John are taking is a stronger stand. We acknowledge that innocents will die. We acknowledge that this is inherent in war. This strengthens our resolve. Yeah. Oh, and Frank does say I paid $2. That is true. We read out, but we did read out more messages that were not super chats. But that's you know, we appreciate our super chatters, and we'll you know, read their comments even when it's not super chats. And yeah, this was one of those discussions which were actually a part of the reason for the reality show. I like the fact that we're not always in agreement. I like when we are in agreement about things, but I think it's better television this way, and it also you know, it helps anybody to be challenged on their views. It's always a good thing. And so with that, yeah,
I feel like we didn't quite put our finger on the locus of disagreement though. So maybe we'll have to do that another time. Because I like when Robert just said that I feel like that almost wasn't the area of disagreement, but then it kind of was. So maybe we didn't fully flesh out what we were disagreeing about in a way.
well, luckily or unluckily, this war will be a topic that you know, is sticking around, and we will talk about for a long time. We are doing some other programming, so you know, we had our first non-war show last week. Next week we have two non-war shows. On Wednesday, the reality show will be the ARCUK Awards. We're not giving up on that annual tradition. That's going to happen. Another annual tradition we're not giving up on is our year in review, which is next Friday. I think we'll probably talk about the Republican primaries next month. So, but yeah, even when the war is not the only topic, it will be the main topic. Robert sends a super chat, so I will read that. Although I read all of Robert's comments, or most of them, even though they're not super chats. But yeah, Robert gets special treatment here. But the super chat, of course, is always appreciated. Here's some language acceptable to YouTube's super chat, blah, blah, blah. On that very positive note, I think, yeah, we have to wrap up because the Briefly Objective is starting in a few seconds. James Valiant on Finkelstein, not just a sociopath. All right. I'm glad it's not me talking about this guy. I tried when we did the show about him. I struggled, as those of you who watched it may remember. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, John. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Jonathan, as well, for joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow. And my interview with David Deutsch, which was supposed to take place a few weeks ago, is coming this Saturday, 5:30 p.m. UK time. Anti-Semitism in Britain. Thank you. We are almost about to compete with ourselves. So thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.